Hello everyone that has joined us today. Molweni, namkelekile, siyabulela ukuba nilapha nathi. I'm joining you from the Time of the Writer Festival, the 27th edition, in Durban, and I'm here with an exciting panel. I'm here with esteemed professors. I'm here with experts such as Professor Sihawukele Ngubane. I'm here with Prof. Elizabeth Roux and Professor Tommaso Milani. It's going to be exciting. Hold on to your seats. Okay, so this session, just to give you a brief overview, is going to be exploring the practicalities of literary and academic publishing. This exploration covers the ever-changing publishing landscape, the intricacies of book production, and the nuances of storytelling with a focus on languages. The session seeks to offer a realistic glimpse into the challenges and triumphs of the industry and the importance of the university press. The session seeks to empower aspiring authors and literary enthusiasts. I am so excited to read the bios of our panel. I feel like I don't know them enough, but I feel like I do know them a little more just from these bios. They have been doing incredible work, and I'm so grateful that we have them here. The first panelist, Professor Sihawukele Ngubane, is a professor of isiZulu at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. He is an academic, an astute professional, an educator, an author, and editor of several published books. He's involved in and leads many external language and cultural organizations. Under his leadership, organizations such as AMFASA have grown from strength to strength, giving opportunities to previously marginalized authors and providing access to information, closing the bridge between public policy and South African citizens. Prof. Ngubane is recognized as an authority on cultural, tribal, and indigenous subjects, and has been frequently asked to appear publicly on TV, radio, and in other press platforms. He's a highly skilled negotiator, diplomat, and creative thinker, so do not be afraid to ask him any questions. Then we've got Professor Tommaso Milani, is a professor of applied linguistics, Jewish studies, African studies, women's gender sexuality, and women's and sexuality studies at Pennsylvania State University. Throughout his career, he has held many editorial responsibilities, and together with Professor Susan Elrich, I hope I'm saying that right, at the University of York, he edits the International Language Journal in Society. His areas of interest include critical discourse and analysis, language ideology, language policy, language, gender, sexuality, and the linguistic landscape. We are so privileged. And then we've got Professor Elizabeth Roux. Professor Roux coordinates publishing studies, the publishing studies program in the Department of Information Sciences at the University of Pretoria. She has a PhD in publishing studies, researches anti-apartheid and activist publishing and book cultures in Africa. She conducts the annual industry survey for Publishers Association of South Africa and serves on the DSC Ministerial Task Team for the National Book Policy and is a board member of ANFASA. She has also been recently employed as the professor at the University Press. I hope that's correct, Prof. Correct me because we're going to start with you.
Well, I did my PhD on university presses, and so I'm working with Wits University Press as well. So
wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much for that correction. Prof, I do want to start with you. And to start this, I want to read a quote by a dear friend of mine, a publisher who's doing incredible work in providing access to the publishing sector, which has been very elitist previously. Flo Wellington Mutawung says, open quote, "The value of indie publishers and small presses is slowly affirming itself in South Africa. Over the last decade, there has been a tremendous explosion of smaller publishers, in particular, self-publishing. For us self-publishers, the importance has always been to create accessibility in an industry that is so exclusive. So my first question for you, Prof, what is publishing? Where does it start? Where does it end? What is publishing?
So that's a big question to start with. Okay. Um, well, I think of it, and the way I teach it to my students as well, is as a value chain. And it's a circle that doesn't, it kind of spirals, it doesn't end necessarily. It starts with the writers. And of course, that's what most of the focus of what we've been talking about in the time of the writer has been over some time. Publishing wouldn't exist if there weren't people who wanted to write and people who wanted to read, if there weren't things that needed to be communicated or information that needed to be shared. So it starts with the writers. But after that, there's a very important series of steps that need to be taken to get that material, that written word, from the author to whoever the reader might be. And various different people could actually conduct these roles. Traditionally, it's been a publisher who conducts various of these functions, really, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, is what we've seen some of the changes. So there have to be things like there has to be attention to, is the language at the right level for the readers? So is it going to be edited properly? Attention needs to be paid to how it's packaged. So is it going to be designed in an appropriate way? If you think of school textbooks, a book has to be appropriate for that readership, for instance, in terms of the language, the images, the design, all of that as well. And that actually takes quite a lot of skill as well and insight into market as well. And then it also has to be, formats have to be chosen. Is it going to be produced in formats like print? Is it going to be in digital, which can be a whole lot of different formats? An ebook isn't just one thing, there are many different formats. And how will that happen? So you also have to have people who have expertise in making books available in different platforms and making them available and accessible. And traditionally, that's through marketing teams, and then through distribution partners, and then booksellers, of course. We don't always consider what happens after that as part of the publishing cycle. We kind of end at the point usually where we think, well, this book was sold and someone's going to read it. But actually, there is a whole extra loop that has to do with libraries and reusing books and how the circle goes back from, if you're a writer, you should also be a reader at some point. So that would kind of be my, in a nutshell. Publishing is about putting together all of those roles to package the information for the right audience. That sounds like a very technical kind of definition instead of a kind of romantic idea of what publishing is. But that's what it is across all sorts of different sectors and for very different sorts of audiences as well.
It's a lot. There's many levels, many layers to it.
Yes.
But there has been a growth, there has been a surge of self-publishers. What are your insights as to why? What does this say about the sector?
So self-publishing, there are quite a few reasons behind it, but let me also say that publishing in South Africa actually is not dominated by self-publishing, partly because the industry is mostly educational. The biggest part of the South African publishing industry is making school textbooks for the many thousands of learners we have at our schools. That's a good 60% of our industry. And self-publishing doesn't really occur in that sector. In a way, it can't, because it has to go through the Department of Basic Education, and it has to, every single book has to adhere to certain kinds of criteria, very specific curriculum criteria. So when we talk about self-publishing, we're mostly talking about what we call trade books, so books for ordinary readers, the kind of thing that you would buy at an ordinary bookseller. So that's novels or nonfiction, but that's mostly for educational, perhaps some informational reasons as well. That's really when there's been self-publishing. And well, there are lots of drivers behind that as well. Partly it's got to do with the fact that authors have access to different platforms now. So you don't need to use an intermediary if you are going to produce a book, an ebook, and sell it directly to your users. So an intermediary in that case could be all of the roles conducted by a publisher, but it could also be roles of distribution, of printing, of bookselling, for example. So you could be bypassing not just a publisher, you're bypassing an entire ecosystem of how publishing has worked traditionally there. And there are quite a lot of reasons for this. A lot of the time it has to do with authors wanting more control. So they feel that when they negotiate with a publisher, perhaps they feel they can't negotiate with a publisher, actually. They feel they're not in a position where they could look at their contract and talk about that and come to an agreement, which you can actually do. So they might not feel that they can get access to a publisher, that perhaps the publishers have decided they can only publish a certain number of titles in a year. South Africa is a very small market, so you can only sell a certain number of titles. Perhaps what they're writing is not what the publishers themselves are interested in. We know that every publisher produces different sorts of books, for example. So maybe if you're doing something quite experimental, there's not going to be a publisher that's interested in that. So it could have to do with what kind of work you're producing as well. But it definitely, if I go back to that quote that you started with, there's a real perception that publishers are exclusive and elitist and don't want to open up their lists. And that, I'd have to say, is not the case, although I understand why many authors would feel like it is the case. Every publisher I know is desperate to open up their lists in various different ways and to reach different audiences. But some of their own processes, which take a long time, hinder them from doing that. And self-publishing is a way of getting around some of those really time-consuming kinds of decision-making processes, for instance. But I would caution any self-published author. In fact, I wouldn't call them self-published authors. They're micro-publishers themselves as well. They often go on to
Indie
publish other
publishers.
books too. They really need to think about all the roles. They need to not just think about writing and then making it available. Those other functions that I was talking about still need to happen. You still need to make sure that your work is accessible at the right level in terms of language. You still need to make sure that it is designed and there are conventions which it should follow. And if you're going to put it up on Kindle, you really need to know how to format it, which is not something that the average ordinary author actually is taught at any point to do. So there are a lot of tasks you're going to have to take on that are probably not within your skill set if you're a writer. Your skill is writing, not formatting and marketing and selling and all of that. So it's not necessarily a caution, but I'd like to remind self-published authors or micro-publishers that they in fact then become publishers and they need to fulfill those roles then.
I really appreciate that caution, Prof, and which is why I quoted this particular publisher, because she also teaches other publishers, indie publishers, on self-publishing and the economies of scale and the reality is that this is not a quick fix to fame. You're not going to earn, these high amounts that you might have thought you were not going to get if you were with a traditional publisher. But the reality is very few Black authors of color in South Africa get published. It is difficult to get published in South Africa. And there has been a rise of self-publishers. Prof. Ngubane, can I come to you now with Prof. Leroux having given us a very broad and insightful context into what publishing is and the challenges or the roadblocks that publishers have to, or authors have to consider when they go into this industry. Could you give us context into the current realities of South Africa's publishing industry?
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. And thank you, Beth, for the background information. And as we know that publishing starts with an idea. An author has an idea that needs to be published and disseminated. So when we speak of academic publishing, it is a contribution to the dissemination of scholarly research and knowledge. And also, when you publish books and journals, you consider the discipline where you belong. Like if you belong in science, you publish alongside your discipline. And this is also part of the advancement of academic discourse and the development of local scholarship, because we always import books from other countries. So it is important for me to highlight that right from onset. But I want to focus my discussion point on the harsh realities in South Africa by examining factors such as industry's diversity, and also looking into the challenges with distribution and also access and the impact of digitalization. I think Beth has already touched on ebooks, which is also a challenge because of the different audiences that we have in this point in time. And also the other one is the efforts to promote local literary works and the issue of indigenous languages. These days, in our democratic dispensation, we are trying to raise the voices of the previously marginalized authors, because in the past, there was no freedom of expression, and each time you write about what you feel, there were censorship from government. So all those are some of the issues that pushes the whole publishing landscape to focus on indigenous languages. Additionally, issues related to funding and infrastructure also play a significant role in shaping the landscape of publishing in the country. And this entails navigating a complex landscape influenced by various factors such as diverse languages. We are the only country where we have 12 official languages. I know Nigeria has more than that, but here we cannot compare ourselves like Europe, where they have one language and one culture. Here we have quite a number of diverse languages, and some of these languages are dialects, and they have no standard orthography, and you cannot develop literature through the dialects. But within the 11 indigenous languages, including the 12th language, which is sign language, I think that is also a challenge. We, as Anfasa, we have recently launched 22 books representing all 12 official languages, and it was quite exciting to include the Nama language. And with the Nama language, we developed the orthography of the Nama group, and also we produced an audio, and also catering for the blind.
Okay, I'm sure Prof is going to come back soon. I just want to come to you now, Prof Milani. Okay, here he is.
Multilingual society requires publishers to consider translations and multilingual editions to reach a broader audience, because, like, if you write in Shivenda, your audience is limited to the vendor speaking. But if you translate into English, it can reach out to all indigenous people, and including English and Africans. So this adds to complexity to the production process. And the first point is also the distribution challenges. Access to distribution networks, particularly the rural areas, can also be limited. Publishers may need to explore alternative distribution channels or collaborate with existing network to ensure their publications read across the country. We know that post COVID-19, we had witnessed booksellers closing down. Here in Durban, we had a company called Adams Bookshop, and it closed all the branches from Maritzburg, Durban, and even in Musgrave, it was closed down. And also we had Adams and Creek. So that is also a challenge. Closing down of bookshops and booksellers limits the distribution points. throughout the country. So there are very few bookshops remaining, and mainly they focus on English books, and the indigenous languages also suffer because their books. If you go to exclusive bookshop, you can't find books because of the market. Uh, the shops will focus on marketable books that have been produced. And also, other challenge is the digital transformation. Like elsewhere in the world, we know that digitalization has impacted publishing in South Africa, necessitating adaptation to ebooks, as Beth has alluded to, and also online platforms and digital marketing strategies. They remain competitive and accessible. We still have a challenge on funding and support. We know that publishers always rely on grants and subsidies from government and from business sector, or sponsorship to support production of literary academic work. So that is also another challenge of accessing funds, and that process is also essential for the practicality for publishers. Then the promotion and marketing. The effective marketing and promotions are crucial for gaining visibility and also attracting readership. And publishers need to strategize on how effectively they market their publication through various channels, including social media. I think social media is playing a crucial role in disseminating knowledge these days. And also they can use a literary festival and also academic conferences, because those are the only platform that can be utilized. And the other challenge that emanates from the challenges that I have is the quality assurance, whereby you ensure high editorial and academic standard, and publishers must invest in professional editing, peer review processes for academic publishing, and rigorous quality control measures to maintain credibility and uphold academic integrity. The other crucial challenge is legal and ethical. We know that we have been fighting for the copyright amended bill, where there is a clause of fair use as opposed to fair dealing. Because when the government approves the bill with a clause of fair use, it means authors will suffer because their book will be copied, and there will be no need for licensing the works. And that is a main challenge, which is a legal and also ethical reason. So publishers must always adhere to copyright laws, the intellectual property rights, and ethical guidelines related to academic publishing. So this includes obtaining permission to use copyrighted material and also ensuring a proper attribution. So the other challenge is the collaboration and partnership between publishers and authors, scholars, translators, illustrators, printers, and other value chain. Anfasa established a contract apart between the publishers and also the authors, because we know that there are challenges when it comes to contracts. Sometimes there is no advocacy towards authors on how to deal with the contracts. It's like taking an insurance. When you take a life insurance or any short-term assurance, there are minor details that you don't look at. They just point out to the main aspect of the contract, and then they want you to sign. So we felt that we need to avoid conflicts and dispute between authors and publishers. We have now established a contract which is available on our website to assist authors in understanding the legal guidelines towards signing their contracts. I think overall, navigating the practicalities, it requires publishers in South Africa to be adaptive, to be innovative and responsive to the evolving needs and dynamics of the industry and the broader society. We know that there is an ever-changing landscape within the publishing industry. Maybe I can stop there for now and take other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. And some of the pointers that you raised, I actually want to refer back to Professor Leroux. You also spoke on quality assurance. You spoke on translations. You spoke on indigenous languages. So I do want the two of you to have a conversations about some of the challenges that you spoke about. Professor Milani, can I come to you? Are you ready? Okay. You are in journal publishing, and most authors do not consider this as an avenue that they can go into. We think of journal publishing as something for the academic field. Can you tell us what journal publishing is about? Are there opportunities for, let's say, creative writers in journal publishing? Can you just talk about journal publishing so we can perhaps know if there's opportunities there?
Yeah, so first of all, a very, very brief description for our viewers who might not be familiar with journal publishing about the process of what happens. So you're right, it's typically academics employed at different universities around the world who submit their research in the form of an article, typically a research article, although there are different genres, and I'll get back to those genres. And typically a research article is approximately between 7,000 and 10,000 words. So they submit it to a specific journal, then the editor of the journal reads it, and if the editor thinks that the article is suitable for that specific journal, it gets sent out for what's called double-blind peer review to 2, 3, or 4 reviewers. Double-blind peer review means that neither the author nor the reviewer knows each other's identity. So the reviewer does not know who the author is, and the author does not know who the reviewers are. And then on the basis of the assessment that these reviewers send to the editor, then the editor makes a decision, which is typically could be either major revisions or minor revisions, or it could also be reject. And so if it's reject, then the editor sends a polite but email saying, unfortunately the reviewers don't think that your manuscript, that your article is publishable for these reasons, and the author receives like detailed feedback about that decision. If it's major revision or minor revision, the editor then says, okay, the article is very good or good, but is not ready for publication yet, and here what you need to do, to make it publishable. However, as I said, so this is a typical kind of the process for a research article, right? Some journals, especially in the humanities, accept and are willing to publish a variety of genres, which are not just the typical research article. So research article means that in the article you are reporting on a project, and so the typical research article will have a theoretical framework, a methodology, and results. Some journals publish also essays, so forms of creative writing. Some journals also publish visual essays, so a set of photographs with perhaps like some a narrative around those photographs. And well, some journals also send out those essays for peer review, but it's a different type of peer review, right? It's because here we're talking about a creative work of art or of literature, right? So there are possibilities, but one needs to know which journal allows for this breadth of genre, this breadth of type of writing. So for example, a very good journal in South Africa that is based in South Africa that publishes a breadth of articles with different types of formats is Agenda, which is a very well-established gender and sexuality, feminist journal publishing work on gender and sexuality that has been around for a long, long time and has published amazing research, but also amazing work of art and creative writing. So just an example, right? I also want to take the opportunity to go back to what Professor Ngubane said, because the issue of multilingualism is something that's always been close to my heart. I lived and worked 10 years in South Africa, and I worked at Wits University. And there is a very, very big problem with the journal publishing industry, which is built exclusively on English. So it's an English-dominated industry, right? And this is not just a problem for South Africa, because even Europe and the rest of the world is multilingual, right? Even in Europe, there's not like one language, one nation. There is a breadth, of languages spoken and written. So it is a huge problem that the whole journal publishing industry is built nearly exclusively on English. Some publishers have now made a decision to publish at least the abstracts for each article, so meaning the summary at the beginning of each article, and these summaries are available to everyone, so they're not behind a paywall. They are you Google an article, and then whoever has access to the internet, can read the abstract. So some publishers have made the decision to publish the abstract, so the summary of the article, in English plus one or two other languages, which is, in a sense, it has been interpreted by some as quite tokenistic in a way, but if read through a more positive lens, we could say that at least it's a first step to make the content accessible to readers whose perhaps strongest language might not be English. And I know that some authors, especially from South Africa, have chosen, for example, to write the second abstract, for example, in isiZulu, or in other South Africa, in other languages spoken in South Africa, because the editors do not police which language you choose. You can choose whichever language you want for the abstract, right? I also want to link again to some points that both Professor Ngubane and Professor Leroux talked about and related to the journal publishing industry, is about the geopolitics of publishing. So meaning that it's mainly controlled by very large publishing companies that sometimes are linked to universities in the global north, so like Oxford University Press, Cambridge University Press, but also other publishers for profit. So for example, Taylor and Francis, which is Routledge, or Wiley Blackwell. And the issue is that these, so all the articles that academics write are often behind a paywall, right? So it's only if you are an academic based at a university that you can actually have access to those articles, because typically the university, South African universities do too, right? They subscribe to these packages through which both academics and students have access, but you cannot have access as a South African citizen unless you are registered as a student at a specific university. However, publishers are becoming increasingly more aware of the problems of these geopolitical imbalance between the global north that can afford all these subscriptions that are extremely expensive and the global south, where even some South African universities really struggle to pay those subscriptions to these journals. And so, for example, Cambridge University Press is among those, and I'm mentioning Cambridge University Press because the journal that I edit is published by Cambridge University Press, has instead starting to introduce, first of all, discounts for universities in the global south, including South Africa. And now it's moving towards a system whereby authors based in South Africa, their articles will be published open access without any extra fee. Actually, Cambridge University Press is considering even moving completely open access without fees. So in a way, there is a discussion in the industry around the importance to cater also for countries which cannot afford to pay those very high fees.
Thanks for touching on that, Prof. Milani, because I did want to ask you about access to journals, because there's so much rich information within them, but it's, there's an issue with accessibility. So it's interesting to hear that Cambridge is considering open access. Okay, you also mentioned Agenda in South Africa, that's that's a more versatile journal. If there's any other journals that you can tell us about, please think about them. I'm going to come back to you because I'm sure there are people who want to know. I have a question for both you, Prof. Leroux and Prof. Ngubane. Again, with access, we are being encouraged to publish Indigenous books. And this question came up during the session this week with Dr. Sithiwa. I want to get his name just now, but one of the participants at the time of the writer raised a question about access to Indigenous books. So we're being encouraged to publish Indigenous books, but where should these books be made available? Because, as he said, you find that these books are stuck in markets that actually don't want them. So how can what's your advice in actually getting these books to the markets that actually want them? And Prof. Leroux, I want to come to you because you did talk about how difficult it is to get into the education sector in South Africa. Yet we have a multilingual, we have a multilingual country. Yeah, can you talk about access and the challenges and the opportunities?
Sure. And it's such an important question. It's one that we have to talk about, is languages and accessibility of those languages in South Africa. The educational sector in South Africa is the one that does the most publishing in the different languages. And it's got a lot to do with market size. So if you think South Africa's market generally is small, so by that I mean that if you're publishing a book in English that is a bestseller, you're selling maybe 2,000 to 5,000 copies. And from that, you might just be breaking even as a publisher and as an author. You're probably not making very much money out of this. And that's considering people who buy the book, not just readers. So you do have to think about, for any other language, you have the number of people who speak the language, but you also have to think about, so how many of those people would buy this book? Because it might be, a romance in isiZulu, and someone might very much want to read a book in isiZulu, but they don't read romances. Then they're not going to buy that book. And then it's not the language that's the problem, it's the genre. So sometimes you have to think about, your audience isn't just a language audience. It also, audiences are very fragmented. So people read in different genres. They might want to read in different languages. It's not just about making books available. It's not just that the books must exist, must be written and must exist. You have to think very carefully about not just who will read it as well, but who will buy it. One of the main interventions that I think would be the most important intervention to support writers, small publishers, and the different languages in South Africa would be a library model that's very similar to that in countries like Sweden, perhaps, where there's specific library funding to buy locally published work and making sure that they're available in every library throughout the country. That in itself would make many books viable that otherwise would not be, because then you're guaranteeing that you'd sell, it would vary, but maybe you would sell 500 copies of a book like that. That could make a book profitable enough for a small publisher or a large one to say, yes, this is something that I could do. There's a point in the chat about competition, and competition is a big problem too, but not in local languages. So if there really is a niche, if there really is a readership and people who want to buy books in local languages, then we should by now be seeing that in terms of books in certain languages selling more copies than others. And to date, we have not really seen that, even when the books are available. I think that one of the things we have to look at is there's not like some kind of void. There are books that have been published in all of the South African languages. They can be tracked down, even if it's difficult to do so. But it's very hard to find out what those books are and where to find them. So I think the library model is one that could make books more visible as well as more accessible, especially for people who don't have a great deal of money to spend on books. The library model is a really good one. Apart from that, I sometimes get asked, because I've studied 20th century publishing and apartheid era publishing as well as publishing now, what are some of the differences and what are some of the reasons that Afrikaans publishing did so well? And I have to tell you that it's a great deal of money was put into it. And that was a huge amount of support and funding from government, but also from businesses and also from cultural organizations. And we simply don't have that level of funding or support going into so many different local languages in South Africa that we could see the same kind of growth in readership and buying market that we did see in Afrikaans. It's a very special case all on its own. That's without even thinking about the political connotations, but the economic ones.
Prof, I do want to read out this question. Tumelo Muleleki says, because South Africa is flooded with Western authored books that compete heavily against books produced here, and we are a westernized society, unfortunately. I'm not sure about the stat that I want to point out right now. I stand up for correction. Something like 60% of books in the education system in South Africa are imported, and only 30% are actually locally produced. What are the statistics around the percentages within the books that are in the education system?
In the educational system, in school books, it's nearly at least 90% is locally produced. And this is because of the curriculum. We have a very specific curriculum, every country does. And you have to adhere to the outcomes and what's wanted in that exact curriculum. So to import a book, a history book from another country makes absolutely no sense. Where you will find books from other countries are perhaps something that could be more generic, like possibly an atlas, or possibly if there's a reader of a book like, a Shakespeare or something like that, then it might be. Although those are also very likely to be produced by, for instance, the local office of Oxford University Press, which is actually a South African company. It runs as a South African company. So in education, that's not at all the case, school books. But at academic publishing level, it's different. So at university level, there's a huge dominance of international books, yes.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Prof. Ngubane, can you please speak about access and how, because I know ANFASA has this program, you just did mention it briefly, which is a wonderful program. But how do you get these books in indigenous languages to the markets that actually want them? It was Dr. Mahala who raised this question during the time of the Writer Festival. What are the opportunities? What can we do? as authors, as publishers, as schools, as government to actually make these books accessible?
Maybe I should speak about the new initiative that we established in partnership with the Department of Arts and Culture, whereby we support authors with some funding to do research on any topic and any discipline. And also we focus on fiction writing, not academic writing. And that assists authors to start writing. And also we support the publishers. We identify a few publishers that we consider them as struggling, because we know that due to the economy in our country, some publishing houses are closing down as well. So we identify few of those previously disadvantaged publishers and equip them with some funding to publish these books. As I said earlier, that last year we launched some books on the new literary voices, which was also successful, and we promoted authors that are still upcoming, and some of them were first publishers. So uh, first authors. So I think this is an effort to create access to books. And as you said, the main trend now and focus is to focus on underrepresented authors. So this is by way of promoting access to information and knowledge. And unfortunately, the main market is Department of Education, because some of the books that are produced, they lie in shelves and gain dust. But once the Department of Education has come out with a catalog and they commission publishers to write according to the curriculum, as Beth has mentioned earlier, and then that is only a market that people will go for producing educational books. So, and people also have a challenge. The other challenge that we have in South Africa is the reading culture. You don't just read for non-degree purposes like at universities. People read because that book has been prescribed. If there's no prescribed book, there's no reading. People have other priorities rather than accessing books.
But it's all great, Prof, to fund, publishing, but we have to get the books out to communities. We have to get Xhosa books to Xhosa reading communities, etc., etc. What is government doing? What can we be doing to assist up and coming publishers, indigenous authors, to actually get these books to people who typically wouldn't be able to afford a book? What are we doing to assist in representation of readership? Maybe people aren't reading because they don't identify themselves in the literature that they're reading. Of course, we do have low literacy rates, but what can we do to actually assist as opposed to constantly, just funding the publishing side of things?
Yeah, this is the initiative that I think will provide some solutions to this problem of access, because, as I'm saying, the government has come on board to produce. For the next 5 years, they will be producing more and more indigenous books, focusing on South African official languages. So this is one way of government playing their part in promoting the publishing of indigenous books. I
Okay,
think
can
it's
we?
it's already happening. It's happening already.
Yeah, I did see a call about that. Can we find out more about this program on Anfasa? I think it is a great program. So could people look at the Anfasa page to find out more about this particular program, or just basically Google this basic education program?
We will soon, in 2 weeks' time, make a call for manuscript. And once we have made the call, we will allow a period of 2 to 3 months for authors to write manuscript. And we have a selection committee that will adjudicate the entries, and then we start the process of selecting the best manuscript for publishing. So it's going to be on our website, www.anfasa.org.za. So I think you must just, people must just watch the space. We will be announcing a call to all South Africans to start writing their manuscripts.
Thank you so much, Prof. That is encouraging. We have 7 minutes left, and I would just like to give each and every one of you an opportunity to say anything with regards to the realities of publishing and to encourage aspiring authors and publishers within the sector. We can start with Professor Roux.
Okay. Well, I think the main thing that government could do, apart from funding things like this publishing hub, is to fund libraries. So I really think that's the biggest policy initiative that could support authors, readers, and publishers, is to fund library sales. We haven't spoken a lot about digital, but I think that it's often suggested as being kind of a solution for many of our problems for publishing in a country like South Africa. Again, I think it isn't. Based on preferences, based on infrastructure as well. I mean, just our ESCOM issues, it's not actually the most efficient or cost-effective way of getting books to the majority of people. Print is still actually much more user-friendly and cost-effective over a large scale. I think what you've been saying about access is a key one, though, to know where to sell books in a place that ordinary people could buy them. And it's not one that we've been able to solve so far. There have been some sort of suggestions about different kinds of bookshops or selling through supermarkets, selling through different ways like this. But so far that has not been solved. And I do think it's something that we need to have many different initiatives to try and see what we could do to improve access in that way.
Thank you so much, Prof. Prof. Milani, any inspiring words for our authors and our publishers?
I just want to, I'm not sure whether they are inspiring. I just want to encourage all the viewers to perhaps engage more and read more research published by scholars based in South Africa in journals. And even if at the moment they might not have access to the full article, but to read the abstracts, not least because there is another initiative that many journals have started, namely writing abstracts in plain language that is without academic jargon, and it's more accessible to a breadth of audiences. So I think it's important. I think it's important to read anything, but I think it's also even more important to read research published by scholars based in South Africa. So I'm very adamant about that, having lived in South Africa many years, and South African researchers need support, among other things, by readers who should engage with their research.
Prof. Ngubane, could you please close us out? And there was a question. Thank you so much, Prof. Milani. There was a question that I did want to ask all of you, Professor Roux and you, Prof. Ngubane, which is, are there any opportunities for authors to get into university presses? If we don't have time, maybe this is a conversation we can have at another time. But Lovedale Press, we discussed it at the festival this week. There was a point where it was publishing hundreds of thousands of books during the apartheid era, and it seems to have died down. Not seems, it has. But yes, so there are still presses that exist. How can people access those presses? What are you looking for as university presses? If we have time, we'll come back to it. But Prof. Ngubane, can you please close us out with encouraging words?
Yeah, I think the most encouraging word, whilst we are touching on university presses, I think in South Africa, they serve as a crucial conduit for the production and dissemination and also preservation of knowledge. And they also play a vital role in the country's academic and intellectual landscape. So what I would like to say in closing is that we must encourage the local talent, local authors, to focus on the linguistic and cultural diversity in writing so that we promote our cultures through writing, and we assess the differences in our languages. Our languages are far apart, even the ones that we call indigenous. There is no mutual intelligibility amongst ethnic groups in South Africa. So I want to say, with the digital transformation, let us promote translating our mother tongues to other languages or to English so that it can reach out to more audiences in South Africa. I think those are the words that I can close off the discussion. And thank you very much to my colleagues here, and also to you for asking relevant questions. And I think the audience has benefited through our responses. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It is 5 o'clock. I had so many more questions because this sector wants to hear from you. It is a growing sector. There are changes in it and there are opportunities in it. And thank you for the work that you are doing to enrich young minds and older minds. Thank you for your work in academia, but also for the work that you're doing outside academia. I've read all of your profiles, and please keep on inspiring all of us and fighting for us.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Maybe we can take this up in future webinars and discussions as well.
Yes, Prof. We still have a few more minutes. I'm going to read something. It is wonderful then that there are freelance service providers to engage for different process steps so that we produce products that have been vetted under similar stringent processes. What stops these publishers that want to open their that do not want to open their publishing, or that want to open up their publishing from publishing books written in languages other than English or Afrikaans? I take up, okay, Muleleki, you were in this with us today. I take exception to the belief that self-publishing means jumping the processes. It is frustrating for many people. The sector is frustrating, and we need to have more conversations around. But thank you. This has been encouraging, as Professor Milani has said. We can close out, we can leave. It's 5 o'clock.